Okay, so I will get started because, we have like a little bit of an intro and then hopefully I'll be able to see if people join. Um, and if you guys have, something, if you can't hear me or something, just raise your hand and let me know. All right. So excited to see you all. Thank you so much for joining. Today's workshop is called Aligned Ambition, and it's really great to see you all. I see some familiar faces, a new face, so that's really exciting to meet those of you who are new. So if I'm just meeting you for the first time, my name's Chelsea. I'm a keynote speaker, a coach, a digital course creator, but I also still work at Google as a group product manager. But the work I'm doing here today with you is my true passion. And it just excites me so much to share all of this with you. So I'm really excited to see you. But before we get started, if you've been reading the emails about this, I promise to keep it interactive. So I definitely want to do that. We're going to do a quick icebreaker. So I would just love, especially because we're a smaller group, so I would love for everyone just to share one word that describes how they're feeling today. And you could just come off mute quickly, say your name, say hi, and then one word you're feeling. And if you're feeling shy, you can type it in the chat. But obviously, we would love to see you and hear you. So, Sally, why don't you go first? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Course, I went to unmute and clicked into a different window. I don't know how that happened. But hi, I'm Sally, and I think today my word would be hopeful.
Nice. How about Natasha?
Yeah, sorry, I missed your prompt there, but because I was multitasking, sorry. But I think you're just looking for a name and like what I'm doing.
No, just your name and one word about how you're feeling today, how you're showing up today.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, Natasha, and just a little bit sluggish today. Ready for the weekend.
Nice. Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm based out in Chicago, and I'm intrigued, which is why I'm joining.
Nice, nice, nice. And then I think we have Yasmin and Marva, right? Still to go.
Oh, well, Hi everyone, my name is Yasmin, and the word thinking refresh.
Nice.
Hi, everyone. I think my word today is inspired.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks you all for opening up. Okay, so today's workshop is designed specifically for women who look successful on paper, but are feeling like maybe it's not stacked up, to all we were promised. So you're feeling unfulfilled, maybe bored, flat, numb, or maybe even exhausted or burned out. So some of you might be longing for some kind of change, but you really have no idea what that would even look like. And then on top of it, you probably have responsibilities that make you feel like there aren't many options, especially if you're like 10, 15, or even 20 years into your career. So basically, something about your career no longer fits, but you're really not sure what to do about that. So if this sounds like you, today's workshop was made for you. But before we jump into things, I wanted to give you just a little background on the philosophy that this workshop is built on. So, the idea that sits underneath of everything that we're going to be talking about today is something that I call aligned ambition, which is why the workshop is called Aligned Ambition. Most of us are taught to pursue ambition from the outside in. So, chasing titles, maybe like the companies we want to work for, specific milestones. But aligned ambition is different. It's when your ambition is guided not just by external success, but by what actually energizes you, fulfills you, and reflects who you've become over the course of your life. Because when those two things align, your external goals and your internal truth, your career really stops feeling like something you're pushing through and starts feeling like something you're intentionally creating. And the truth is, once someone begins pursuing their career from aligned ambition instead of like a reactive ambition, and I'm going to talk more about what that is, the entire experience of work begins to change. So I want to start by describing something that I see happen over and over again with women around the 10 to 15 year mark in their careers. So at this point on paper, things, look pretty good. At this point in your career, you've probably built credibility, you've developed real expertise, you're probably financially stable, you know how to do your job well. And from the outside, it might even look like things are going exactly according to plan, but internally, something starts to shift. Work might feel a little flatter than it used to. You might notice that the excitement you once felt about your career has faded. And this creates sort of like this really subtle tension that isn't really dramatic at first, but it definitely builds up and gets more intense over time and more draining over time. And I'm speaking from experience, it happened to me. So, for a lot of women, the realization that this internal conflict is happening can be really confusing because, on the one hand, you've worked incredibly hard to build the career you have. But then on the other hand, there's this small voice inside asking a question that can almost feel like uncomfortable to think about or to admit to yourself. And that question is this it? Now, I want to be really clear about something because that feeling, like sometimes when people come to me, especially for coaching, when they start feeling that way, they're like, oh, but I don't want to be ungrateful for everything I have. And I just want to say that asking that question doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It doesn't diminish all of the hard work that you've built, all the career you've built, everything you've done. And it doesn't mean that you just lost your motivation for some reason. It also doesn't necessarily mean you need to completely change your career. So I think that's another common misconception that we'll talk a lot about. Just because you start feeling that way doesn't mean you have to like burn your whole life down and like, storm into your boss's office and quit and then do something crazy that depletes your savings account. So very often it just means something deeper is happening. So today we're going to explore those dynamics that create that feeling because in my experience, once you understand what's actually happening beneath the surface, your entire situation starts to look different because you just feel different. And that's really the goal of this workshop. It's not about forcing yourself to figure out an entire life plan. It's really to help give you some clarity around what's happening so that you can begin to recognize possibilities that may not have been visible before. And I can tell you from my own experience that once you start to see those possibilities, that feeling of flatness or the lack of fulfillment or dissatisfaction really does shift. Things start to feel a lot lighter simply because you realize that you actually have more options than you thought. So, one quick thing, we're going to be doing some exercises and reflections in this workshop. So, make sure you have something to write with. You can use a journal, a notebook, a digital document, like a Google Doc, whatever is most comfortable for you. Okay, so we are going to start with a quick reflection. And if you joined the early access list, you probably you received this already, and maybe you even gave it some thought. I would like for you to think about if nothing about your life had to change immediately. So, in other words, no financial pressure, no expectations. What would you want your work to feel like just on an ordinary day? So, not what it feels like today when you go to work, but what would your ideal feeling be? So, I will give you about 90 seconds to work on that. And you can go ahead. Okay. So let's do a couple of shares. I won't pick on everyone, but um, who would like to go? Who's feeling brave? Anyone?
I'm
I'm
happy to
happy
share.
to. Yeah,
Oh,
go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Emily.
Okay, I was just gonna say like excitement, excitement to see the people you work with, just, something that's drawing you in every day where you get real joy from the work you do, and feel like, you bring something that matters.
right. And how much would you say you feel that way today, like percentage wise?
Not much, to
Okay.
be honest. And so, yeah, so that's it's definitely why I'm kind of
That's why you're
looking for
here. Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Marva, you were going to go?
Yeah, I wrote mostly it was like keywords that came to mind, and it's things like purpose and useful, helpful. So I really relate also to what Emily was saying. I think also for me there was creative as
Mhm.
one thing that came up. I definitely feel I could be creative in other outlets in my life, but for work there is less room for that today. I also feel like I would love to have more interactions with people. So I feel helpful and I feel like I have that human element more and more, and also not so much today.
Yes, I hear you. Anyone else want to share?
I can share. I had similar things to what was already shared, like being collaborative, helping out other people, feeling excited. But I think like the real meat of it is like feeling at the end of the day like I made a difference, either like towards a larger goal and like seeing that success, like either that numerically or even just like on an individual level. Like I really helped that individual person today, just like walking out feeling like I made a positive impact.
Yeah, that's great. One thing, a common theme that I'm hearing from all of you that shared is this desire to be like of service, to be helpful, to feel like your work matters, right? To make an impact, but not an impact that's like metrics based or revenue based. It's like a human impact. And then I love, Emily, how you use the word joy. That's a word that I use a lot when I'm thinking about, my new life and how I want it to be. I think it's really sad we've all accepted that a lot of the corporate jobs we have don't bring us joy on a daily basis. And we've just decided that that's okay, right? Because that's what we think it's supposed to be. So we're going to talk more about all of that. So thank you all very much for sharing. So we'll move on. Okay, so why does success start to feel not that successful when you get to the mid career point? To understand why this happens, I wanted to just talk a minute about how most careers usually evolve over time. So obviously this doesn't apply to everybody, but I think if you're on like a pretty typical corporate path, you'll be able to relate to it. In the early years of your career, growth tends to happen very quickly because everything's new. So you're like learning constantly. It's also really easy. I mean, it might not feel easy at the time, but it's in hindsight, if you look back on it, you're like, okay, maybe it was probably easy to hit your first few milestones because there's so many options in terms of like what you can learn. You also don't have a lot of really great context. So any progress feels good because you're just developing basic skills like figuring out how big organizations work or office environments or building the confidence to talk to people in the right way, learning how to communicate, building like momentum. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but even figuring out my health insurance and 401k when I was 23 and my first job felt like a huge win. So there it's a lot at first. So there's a lot of novelty in those early stages, and that novelty can make work feel stimulating and even rewarding, even if you're not super crazy about your role or the field that you're in. So I started in tech in the mid 90s, and I never felt like it was aligned with me because figuring everything out was so mentally stimulating and intellectually stimulating, that came like with a certain amount of reward. The fact that I wasn't aligned didn't really take up a lot of my mental bandwidth because I was just preoccupied with like, oh my God, wow, I'm learning so much stuff, and it was intense. So I didn't really think too much about like, oh, this doesn't, make my heart sing or whatever. And also I felt so young. I felt like I had all the time in the world, little did I know I was going to get like sucked into that career and not, really consider leaving. So I was basically so busy trying to drink from the fire hose that I just didn't have that much time to dwell on the fact that it wasn't exactly what I wanted. But then, somewhere around the 10 to 15-year mark, not just for me, but for many, many women, something begins to change. You become extremely competent. You know how to do your job well. You understand the systems, the expectations, the dynamics. And because of that, the work starts to feel more predictable. There's less novelty, there's less learning, less challenge, and less meaning. All of you that shared noted that we're not feeling that sense of fulfillment and impact on a human level that many of us desire. The other thing when you get to that mid career point is that promotions start to slow down. And, if you're sort of at this point where you could potentially break through to an executive level or like a senior management level, that starts to feel kind of out of reach for some people, depending on what kind of company you work in. Or maybe, you're just like, I don't know if I want that. So that point in your career when growth kind of starts to slow and then the executive level feels out of reach and it just you're reading your goals or it just becomes a little more difficult. That's called the mid-career ceiling. So when most women reach that stage, it's really easy to interpret the feeling in a way that often doesn't serve ourselves. So we start blaming ourselves and assuming that there's something wrong with us. Maybe you notice that you've lost your spark for work. So now you might start to think, oh, I'm just not as driven as I used to be, or I can't work as hard as I used to, or I'm just not cut out for the leadership level or the executive level. So we really start to internalize this as something being wrong with us. And sometimes, if you have a family, also, you're probably feeling pretty exhausted. And a lot of women kind of feel burned out. And we're going to talk about burnout more in a second. But very often, that interpretation misses the real point, which is that what's really happening under the surface is a lot simpler. It's just that we've outgrown the phase of our career that we originally built. So we've kind of like we've reached basically what we were striving for. The version of you who made those early career decisions was operating with a certain set of experiences, goals, priorities. Maybe, like I said, you were young on the younger side, so you weren't even really thinking long term. You're just kind of like reacting to your career, but you're not that person anymore. Think about how much you've grown since you started your career. After a decade or more of work and life, you just are a totally different person. Your interests have evolved, your values evolve, and most importantly, your definition of success and what it takes to feel fulfilled evolves. So, for a lot of us, our career path hasn't caught up with that evolution yet. And if you spent most of your career just reacting to the most obvious path in front of you, instead of making intentional decisions that actually align with what you want, you might not even know what it would take to feel fulfilled. So I'm just curious, as I was describing that mid-career ceiling, did any part of that feel familiar to you? So if it did, just give a little hand raise with the hand raisey function. Okay, awesome. Yeah, because I can't see you all on the thing. So if you can use the, okay, so yes, that's kind of what I suspected. So as you can see, you're not alone. You can see other people in this room feel this way. And I can also assure you that I hear versions of that story from the women I work with all the time. I felt that way myself. So when people start feeling like work isn't that exciting anymore, and you start to feel that flat, bored, drained, or overwhelmed feeling, a really common explanation is to reach for burnout. And we assume, though, that it's burnout related to workload. But the thing is, burnout almost never comes from workload. It comes from the emotional weight of carrying too much demand, too much pressure, mental spiraling, like that sort of thing. It's a feeling or condition that stems from emotional overload, the constant rumination, and just feeling like emotionally drained at work. even if it's just, I'm not happy. Like that really weighs on you after a while. It's like being in a bad relationship. So, because working out of alignment can cause so much inner conflict, it is really, really emotionally draining. And that means you can absolutely get burned out from working out of alignment. When you work out of alignment day in and day out over a period of years, it does cause that really serious emotional overload. That's why the longer you're in a misaligned job, the worse you start to feel, the more overwhelmed you feel, the less motivated you feel, and so on and so on. And everything sort of compounds over time. But the big difference between demand based burnout and alignment based burnout is that with alignment based burnout, you can't just go on vacation or take time off, because as soon as you come back and start working in your same job again, that feeling comes back. It might take like a month or two, but it will come back. And that's because you're working in misalignment. That's what happens when your career direction no longer fits. Even if you're good at your job, even if you perform well, even if you get positive feedback, that's sort of like a different, that's external. And what you're feeling is very internal. It's an internal condition. Something about the work itself no longer energizes you in the way that it did. So it's very draining. So, one thing I just want to highlight, I don't know if you guys are aware of this stat, but we spend nearly 90,000 hours of our lives working. Some of us might even spend more than that if, like we were overworkers, which many of us are, I assume. But yeah, it's a lot. So if you spend that time working in ways that don't feel meaningful or aligned with who you are becoming, there's a real emotional cost. Because when we work out of alignment, and when we only focus on pursuing external milestones and outcomes without paying attention to how the process feels to us, we can start to feel resentful or exhausted or like we're constantly pushing against ourselves because internally we aren't being fulfilled. And we heard that from everybody who shared today. So it's that kind of internal friction. That's what people describe when they say their career no longer feels right. So let's dig in a little more to understand some of the signals that start coming up, and then we're going to kind of talk about how these things manifest in your own life. So we're going to start this section with a short reflection exercise, and you don't need to overthink this one. I just would like for you to notice the first reactions that come up for you. So when you think about your current job or your current role, what single word thoughts or feelings come up? So it could be things like drained, bored, restless, invisible, resentful, but it also might be like positive things, secure, comfortable, stable. It could be, both on both sides of the spectrum. So just take a 30 seconds or so to think through that and jot those down. All right. Are you guys, you have a few? Okay. Um, all good? Okay. So I'd love to hear from a few of you about what thoughts or feelings come up about your current job. Who would like to go? Sally. You're grinning, so I have to call on you.
I can go. Um, I have messy, drained, burdened, financially advantageous, which I know is two words, but when you said some positives, it's like that's a positive.
Right.
Um, Old, repetitive, unimportant, collaborative.
Okay, good. What about Yasmin?
I was actually laughing because drain was my first one too. When you asked the question, competitive, lack of trust, learning, um, and overwhelmed.
Okay. Emily, would you like to go?
Yeah. Yeah, I had burnt out as my first one, which is kind of similar to drained.
Mhm.
But then I also put numb. So as much as I'm burnt out, I think it's like that lack of passion where it's just like kind of like doing the same thing like you talked about at that 10 to 15 year mark where you feel like you're kind of doing the same things. Lack of passion, stuck. And then I said change fatigue because in my role, I'm navigating a lot of change and I am helping organizations work through change. But I think myself, I'm like, okay, like some stability would be good too.
Yeah. Yeah. Constant change is exhausting. Okay. Thank you all very much for sharing. So we'll move on. Okay, so now something important to understand is that even though it really does not feel good to be in that situation every day, these emotions are actually very useful information because your brain and body are giving you feedback about your work situation. And this is the thing that you're spending so much time in on a daily basis. And feelings don't lie, right? When something feels off, it's because it is. So those are just really important signals that something isn't working for you. But most of us, most professionals, have been trained to ignore these signals or feelings about work. We are so used to believing that we don't have other options or this is just how work is. And high achieving women take this a step further with the self blame, right? It's that tendency that I talked about earlier. When something starts feeling off at work, we blame ourselves. Oh, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not cut out for this. I don't have what it takes. I'm just not motivated anymore. Like all of those kinds of things, or we feel guilty that we're even thinking that because we feel like, oh, we're so fortunate. We should just be grateful for what we have. This is a great opportunity, right? How many people can relate to that, to feeling that way? Right. So that's like a really good way to start shutting yourself down when those things start coming up. And I'll explain more. There's a strategic reason your brain does that. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But these are just early indicators that something about the way we're working no longer fits the same way it once did. So instead of ignoring those signals, I'd love for all of us to start getting curious about them because they're data. And data tells us a lot about what is happening underneath the surface. So, one of the things that happens after that 10 to 15 year mark is that we accumulate an enormous amount of knowledge, capability, and expertise. But because we use those skills every day in our day to day jobs, we stop noticing them and we take them for granted. They basically become invisible to us. They feel normal because it's stuff we do every day. And so we assume that, oh, everybody knows how to do this stuff. But the reality is, everyone can't do the stuff you do because you've spent the last decade or more refining a very specific skill set. And one of the biggest misconceptions I see at this stage in someone's career is assuming that their skills only apply inside the exact role that they currently have. They don't realize how transferable these skills are. They think, oh, I'm good at my job, but they don't always realize that those underlying skills that have been developed can actually translate to so many different environments and would be valuable in many different contexts to many different people. And this connects to something we talked about earlier. So, most of us are taught to build our careers from the outside in. As I said earlier, we chase titles, companies, salary levels, promotions, that sort of thing. And we measure our success based on how well we're progressing along that timeline and those external markers. But we hardly ever pause to take a look at the actual capabilities we've built along the way and take them out of the context of our job to assess their true market value. And when you start looking at your skills more objectively, something really interesting happens. You start to see that your career path might be more flexible than you previously believed. Now, we're going to shift into a second exercise to help you assess and take inventory of just how much you know. So, I did this exercise before I started sort of like on this new path that I'm on. And when I actually wrote down everything I knew how to do, I was shocked. Like I had no idea. So when you do this, try to see yourself and your career as an external person. So I'd like for you just to take a few minutes and write down everything you know how to do professionally. So I don't mean your job title or your official responsibilities. I mean like everything, regardless of how basic it seems or regardless of whether you believe everyone can do that. So things like managing projects, influencing stakeholders, mentoring, simplifying complex ideas. You could also list more specialized skills like data analysis or any sort of like AI specialty skills, copywriting, digital graphic design, that sort of thing. Okay, so take a minute or two to do that. Okay, how are you guys doing? Do you need more time or are you good? Okay. So, I mean, obviously you can come back to this. This doesn't have to be the only time you do this. So who would just actually we can all share because Natasha and Marva had to drop off. So, Emily, would you like to share some?
I had managing through change, coaching leaders, consulting, org design, project management, written and verbal communication, Excel, project management, building out training content, data analysis, and storytelling, reductions in force, career pathing and architecture, performance management, just some of those.
Amazing. Yeah, and that was just like 90 seconds of you
Like, can you
brainstorming.
guess my job? No.
Yeah. HR. Yeah. The riff, Scott. I was like, okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yasmin.
So I have managing project, breaking down tasks into smaller, measurable pieces. AI, translate problem into AI and ML, data analytics. I'm a self-learner in new technology.
Mhm.
Building trust, getting and asking for help. It's, I also feel like it's comes easy to me, and influencing stakeholders.
That's great. That's a really good list. Okay, Sally, what about you?
I have prioritize, manage complex projects, understand complicated issues, and identify solutions, mentor colleagues, understand the big picture and how the small details impact that, identify issues and misalignments, manage projects, rally the troops, like bring positivity and bring people together, advocate for others, ensure everyone's voice is heard, help people feel comfortable, spreadsheets, and understanding metrics.
Amazing. Okay, those are some great lists. And like I said, you guys just did it for 90 seconds. So I guarantee you, if you spent like 30 minutes on it, you'd be like, oh yeah, and come up with a bunch of other stuff as well. But regardless, those are great lists. So I want to share something personal here for a minute. So, about 5 years ago, I really hit bottom in my career. So, I finally had gotten promoted to a leadership level a few years before, which was something I was trying to do for a very long time. So, but it didn't make me any more fulfilled once I got it. So after the promotion, I became less and less excited about the work I was doing because like I hit the goal and then like it didn't really feel any different. I still felt that flat feeling and that lack of fulfillment. So I just lost interest. You know, there was nothing to kind of occupy my mind. So it was more though than just work feeling flat. I actually started to feel really depressed. And, you know, that's why I related so much, Emily, to what you said in the beginning, because that lack of feeling joy on a day-to-day basis just really started to get to me. It was a lot. And, you know, it was kind of like, okay, I've gotten to where I've wanted to go, but now I had to sit with the realization that the work I was doing didn't actually fill me up with joy. You know, I would even say it was the opposite of that. And remember, I said in the beginning of my career, I kind of knew I wasn't really aligned with tech, but I kept doing it anyway. So it like really caught up with me at that point. So I did a lot of self reflection to try to figure out what was going on. And I realized a lot of what you talked about today, wanting to feel. What I realized was that there were qualities that I was really craving that I was either not getting at all from work or I was getting in like really small quantities. And so obviously that's why I was feeling unfulfilled. And I had some similar realizations to all of you. I really liked connecting with people. I love talking to people. Like I like feeling like a human being and having fun and helping them to solve problems. And, you know, that feeling of being of service is super important to me. So you know, I think all of you said that you wanted to feel like your work is making an impact in some major way. And I felt the same way. You know, I wanted to feel like my work mattered, but on a human level, right? So even on the outside, I had the title and the salary that I've been driving towards, which was that external milestone. Internally, I felt profoundly empty because I wasn't spending enough of my day doing those things that really lit me up. And the worst part of this was that the parts of my job that consumed the majority of my time were the things that drained my energy the most. And that's the key point here is that the realization didn't immediately lead to some dramatic decision. So I said this earlier, it wasn't like I realized this and then I was like, okay, I'm out of here, you know, but because I'll tell you the truth that at that time I was very much still held back by a limiting belief I had, which was rooted in fear. And that belief was that I will never be able to make as much money anywhere else as I do at Google. And we're going to talk about fear based beliefs shortly. But I just wanted to make the point that I didn't have some dramatic burn it all down moment. The realization started a very different kind of process. And that process was a process of exploration and openness. And the openness was being open to the possibility that maybe there were adjustments that I could make to get more fulfillment out of what I was already doing. So I was so far away at that point from believing that I could even do a career switch. I was just in this phase where I was like, okay, well, maybe I can try to make my job more like the things I like, right? I still just could not fathom that I could do anything else. So that willingness, though, to look at things differently happened because I started thinking about where my energy was going and what kinds of work consistently gave me energy back. So that's the reflection that ended up shaping all of the decisions I then made over the next 2 years that led me on this path that I'm on today. So that's what we're going to be doing next. So go back to the list you just created and look at everything you wrote down. And I'd like for you to circle the items on the list that you actually enjoy doing. And if there's none, then that's okay. That's something to notice. But think about the things that actually make you happy or feel energized instead of like drained or annoyed. So I'll give you, about the same amount of time for that.
Chelsea, I have a question. For me, it seems like all the ones that I wrote down as my skills are the ones that I actually enjoy doing.
Good. That's good.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
So I'm starting to wonder what is that like, it seems like my job. Anyhow, we can talk about that more. Like there is a misalignment with what bothers me. It seems like the things that I don't like about my job or don't aren't in my skill set. So maybe that's the reason, but
Interesting. Okay, well,
that's what I'm thinking.
okay. Okay. Well, let's just start. We can start by sharing while everybody else is finishing up. So, can you, before we talk about that, can you think about things in your job that you didn't write down that you don't like skills you can do? You can. Like, can you just give me like one or two examples?
Competition is something that in my job I feel like, or taking a space and leading when there is competition is something
Mhm,
that is harder for me to do.
mhm. Okay. So I think that has more to do with the feelings. I mean, just so you guys know, I work with Yasmin privately, so that's how I know more about her. But maybe that has to do with just your feelings around those things, around how you perceive competition and leadership, right?
Yeah,
Because of the environment that you're in.
yeah,
So, okay. So, and I would say that's also why you didn't write those skills down because you just don't like them, you know. But that's fine. So basically, you're saying everything that you wrote down around your skills, you do feel energized by them.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's great.
Mhm.
I think environment is interesting too because that's a choice you can make, and maybe it's just choosing a different type of industry or something like that. Making different decisions in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And that's kind of the point of today is to help you get clear on what's actually going on so that you can figure out, well, is it a career change? Is it a role change? Is it a company change? Or is it something totally different? So, Emily, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I circled the ones that were more about like the positive things that my role does, like coaching, consulting, development, also like creative. I feel like that's a skill of mine.
Oh, you're breaking up again.
I just said creative was one that I don't feel like I can leverage as much.
Mhm,
But coaching, development, consulting,
mhm.
those are the ones I circled.
Okay, good. Good, good, good. And then were there ones that are on your list that you have, but you have to do a lot of at work? So, in other words, they drain you, but you still have to do a lot of them in your job. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. I think that there definitely is.
Okay.
There's more of those.
Okay. Okay. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. When you look at that list, you're like, wow, I'm spending a lot of time on things I don't like that are actually incredibly draining. Okay, Sally.
I would say I had a similar experience to Yasmin where I looked at like the things that I do and I was like, oh, I think I like most of these things. And in that, like, I think the things that I don't necessarily like doing are things that I was saying, like, those are things I don't know how to do well, maybe. I don't know, or like that just don't come to mind. And like, an example of that is like really formal, like communication or like, negotiations, like influencing sometimes without authority. Like, those are the things that like I didn't put down here that I do know that I do, but I don't like enjoy
You don't
doing.
like them.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's good. I mean, as I said, this is really to help you get clear. We're going to do a couple of different things with this list. So, okay. So thank you very much for sharing. So, one thing, like I was mentioning to Emily, and like I mentioned about my own experience, it's helpful to start noticing the either the tasks that you're good at but they don't energize you anymore, or like tasks that you never really like that you have to spend a lot of time on in your current role. So like those are the kinds of things that this exercise is meant to help you see, because all of those experiences are very common. And then I think both Yasmin and Sally, you guys called out something really interesting, which is like an environmental like a situation. But I would just ask you to think about, to reflect, and we'll talk a little more about this. Most dynamics that we experience in corporations are the same from corporation to corporation, right? Because you're basically working with all of these different people. It's like this big ecosystem of relationships. Not everybody works on themselves. Not everybody is self aware. Some people are, some people aren't. Even when people are, they still get triggered, right? That, people start operating from a place of scarcity and then they get competitive and, we don't like that kind of stuff. And then going back to what we were talking about earlier about wanting to feel like you're actually making a positive impact. There's going to be, we have a limited set of companies out there, I think, whose values align with our own. So that's just something to think about when you're reflecting on these things about environment. Like usually the dynamics are the same, especially, well, I'm not going to jump ahead because we're going to talk about this, but the key point here is like usually office dynamics are the same or similar from office to office. So just something to bear in mind. Okay. So, I think I made the point here just that when we start paying attention to that energy pattern about like where our energy is going and how we're spending our time and how those things make us feel, it really starts to reveal a lot about the kinds of roles and environments that might make us feel more aligned going forward. Okay, so let's talk about some of the deeper patterns at play that can really keep us stuck in situations, even when they're not helpful for us. So, a really important aspect of thinking about what keeps us stuck and working in misalignment is how we make decisions when we're feeling stuck. One of the biggest mistakes that people make when they start feeling dissatisfied in their career is that they try to solve the problem from the exact emotional state that created it. So, as we talked about earlier, when you work over a period of years in a state of misalignment, you start to get drained and exhausted. You feel frustrated, maybe resentful. And sometimes we might just reach a breaking point and feel like, okay, I have got to get out of here, right? So it's like our fight or flight kicks in. And when we're feeling like that, it's easy to make a quick decision to change roles, to change teams, or maybe even leave a company in an attempt to alleviate that emotional distress or overload. But the potential issue with that is that the decision to leave the role or the team or the company is a reaction. And it's coming from that very misaligned inner emotional world that you're operating from. So that means that it's not an intentional decision coming from a place of alignment. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So the result of that, this is the important part, is that when we do that, we end up in a very similar situation to the one that we were trying to get away from, right? Because we're the same person making a decision in the same mindset, and we'll end up in the same situation. I always compare work to relationships because they're really, really similar, but you may remember when you were younger, like seeing your friends or maybe yourself going into relationships that had similar patterns, right? The people were different, but the patterns were often the same. Or you have that one friend that just kind of goes from bad relationship to bad relationship because the person doesn't change who they are internally, right? So that's why that happens. And we may not recognize that right away in a new job because, again, the novelty of that new job keeps us busy. But once that settles down, we very quickly realize that once again, we feel flat, we feel dissatisfied, we're not feeling fulfilled. And then slowly that entire process starts all over again, where, the feelings start escalating and you get overwhelmed. And then you're like, I got to get out of here. So the reason for that is, like I said, because we didn't do anything to change the fact that the reason we felt overwhelmed to begin with was because we were working in a misaligned way. So any step we continue to take on that same misaligned path will likely continue to lead us to similarly misaligned situations. So when we're making decisions about our career, it's really important that we make them from an aligned place because the emotional state we make decisions from shapes what we create next. So that means if we're operating from urgency, pressure, fear, we'll end up creating more situations that feel urgent, pressure, anxiety. That's basically fear. But when people start making decisions from an aligned place using curiosity, steadiness, possibility, the opportunities they move toward tend to reflect that emotional shift. So, alignment isn't only about what decision you make, it's also about who you are or what emotional place you're in when you make it. And that's why this stage of reflection is so important, because before we make a major change, it's important to first reconnect with a more grounded internal perspective. And that's exactly what an exploration phase gives you. So, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So, I'd like for you just to take a minute or two and reflect on your own career, your whole trajectory. Were there ever any decisions you made that were more of a reaction? Maybe not an extreme reaction. Maybe it's just boredom, right? Or flatness. Are you able to draw similarities between the formal situation and the new situation in terms of how you felt in each? And if you don't, that's fine. You don't have to search for it if it's not there. But just take a moment to see if there's any truth in that in your own experience. Okay. How are you guys doing? All right. Who would like to go first? Go ahead.
I can go first. I think that this is kind of fit. So I was living in LA at the time and I didn't have like any career advancement in my role down in LA. So I had to move to the Bay Area where there was more opportunities, but like San Francisco and living in the Bay was like definitely not for me or like aligned with me or like the life that I wanted to live or anything. So I think like I was making this decision from a reactive place. Like if I want to advance in my career, I have to move to the Bay Area. And I was there for a year and then I left and I came to the East Coast and was able to continue to advance my career. And I think a variety of things contributed to that, including like, the pandemic and work culture changing and not needing to be at the hub to advance your career. But it wasn't so much about like the role to role, but it was like making this decision from a place of being reactive and getting there and being like, that was not the right decision for me.
Exactly. And your goal was you did it for advancement, but you got there and you didn't advance, right?
Right. Yep.
Until you left that one. So yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yasmin.
I was maybe the way I was understanding this was how I felt in my previous job. I worked at a startup, and there I always felt like underappreciated. I felt like there was office policy, and I wasn't interested in engaging in those. And then that my boundaries were not being respected, and I was expected to work around the clock. And that was exactly like when I felt like I'm in a fight or flight. I was like, I need to get out of here immediately. And that this is happening, was happening earlier this year again. So yeah, same
Right.
pattern. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, you're right. It could be I was talking about feelings, so you definitely interpreted it the right way. It could be either or. Like Sally, even though she was looking for advancement, there's feelings underneath advancement, right? So it's exactly the same. Emily, would you like to go?
Yeah, I think, I definitely see some patterns. Have told myself like I'm making intentional decisions. Tech is kind of like they burn you out. So I've moved companies after 3 years and usually it's for something intentional like career growth. But, sometimes I look back and it's like, should I have stayed or was it the right decision? And there's part of me that's like, was it job hopping or because it was intentional, was it a good thing to do because I was my own advocate and I was making intentional decisions? And I think there's probably a mix of both. But when you talk about pattern and the fight or flight, like in where I am now, it does like cause me to ask myself, which is something that I have always asked myself internally because I have like counseling background and I love the coaching. Like, am I on the right path or is there something else? Because I do keep like after 3 or 4 years, I'm like, what else? What next? So yeah. So it is something that I have to keep exploring.
Right. Well, I would actually say, Emily, just so I've been doing this process that we're doing today and then through coaching with for about a year now, this very process. I think you are a little further along in like your exploration, you know what I mean, than maybe like somebody that's just starting to question.
Yeah.
Like when I hear you talk, I hear, like you want out. You're
Yeah.
ready for something different. Like you're like, I'm ready. Tell me
I'm
what to
further
do.
along in my exploration, but the outcome is still the same. So like it's taking that action. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll talk about that a bit more.
Yeah.
But yes. Okay. Great shares. Thank you all very much. Okay. So now we're going to take a look at how our traditional view of ambition and our fears and our perceived constraints can keep us stuck even when we know we're not happy. Okay, so like I said in the beginning of this workshop, most of us are taught to build our careers from the outside in, meaning we're chasing these external milestones, right? And so, like salaries, larger teams, more responsibility, the stereotypical things. And those things do feel meaningful for a while. But like I said, when those things start to slow down and we hit that mid-career ceiling, we start looking at that next level and we start to ask a different question. And that question is, do I want more of this? Right? Do I want to go to the next level if that means the same kind of work, but with more intensity, less flexibility, less freedom, more politics, like more of those things that drain us? And the reason that we arrive at that point is because we've been following a version of ambition that was presented to us without questioning where it might end up. So at this point, we're like at a career crossroads because we're not sure if we want more of the same with more personal sacrifice. But at the same time, we have this desire to maintain financial stability. And so that can create this feeling of having really limited options and really being trapped by our own success because we've gotten ourselves into this. We've painted ourselves into a little bit of a corner, right? We're making good money. We have responsibilities. We're successful in what we do, but like we don't want to keep doing it. We don't want to keep going. So it's really, really confusing. And I speak to this from experience. It was one of the most confusing times of my life. Then, on top of the financial aspect, there's also all of the time that went into creating our professional reputation or a level of expertise that took years to develop. And so the thought of starting over at something else, because that's where our mind immediately goes. We automatically are like, I got to start over. I've got to start from the ground up somewhere. The thought of doing that feels not only really discouraging, but irresponsible, right? So it can feel risky to start questioning things and also a little bit overwhelming. And I think that's why it gets confusing because we have this innate desire as humans to advance, to feel like we're making progress. But at the same time, the next obvious step on that traditional career path doesn't seem quite right. But if we think about the alternative, which is usually abandoning everything and starting over, by the way, it doesn't have to be that. We're going to talk about that, but that's where our minds go. That doesn't seem right either, or even realistic. And for a while, we might be able to silence that, sort of like conundrum by going on nice trips or maybe buying ourselves things or, keeping ourselves busy outside of work or with our family. But the fact that we spend so much time at work and it's such a big part of our lives and just like our emotional bandwidth makes it pretty hard to ignore. after a while. And that's why it starts to feel so draining. It's like this constant unsettled feeling that you're not really happy, but you can't really do anything to change it. The feeling I used to get, I'm a pretty dramatic person, but the feeling I used to get is trapped. I'm trapped. Like a lot of people say I'm stuck. I said I'm trapped. So the thing I want you to know is that questioning your path doesn't have to mean abandoning everything you've built or burning down your whole life. It doesn't have to be like that because there's so many options. For now, though, it means becoming more open to exploration about what other possibilities might be out there. So, okay, so quickly, just using the hand raising function, or you can raise your hands because I can see you all now. Um, how many of you can relate to that feeling of being trapped by your success? Okay, all of us. I felt that way too. So before we move on to this next section, I want to take a minute to talk about constraints. So I talked a little about how financial stability is something that comes up a lot for people when we start thinking about possible career shifts. But what else comes up? So this could be like, well, what would people say? Or I don't have options, or I'm too old, it's too hard, it's too late for me, that kind of thing. So just take about a minute to do this, to share what are those constraints. Like when you start thinking about um, leaving your career, pivoting or doing something else or whatever it is, making some sort of change, what constraints pop up in your mind? Okay. How are you guys doing? Good? You need more time or are you good? Okay. So I'd love to hear some of the constraints.
I think besides the financial piece, which is big and real, I think you also mentioned external perception. And I think you can get past that, but like even if like a level title changes, how is that going to be perceived? So I think that's one. And then like what's the first step? So if you are going to pivot in your career, like how does that happen? Do and what does that look like? And I think it's really just taking that first step.
Yeah, that's actually a big one. It's like even people that feel brave enough to be like, okay, I'm ready, they're like, but I don't know what to do. That's a real feeling of powerlessness, right? So we're going to talk about that a little in a sec. Okay, Yasmin, go ahead.
I was gonna actually add to what Emily was saying about the first step. For me, when I'm thinking about my past, it's more non-traditional, and in that way, every step is like creative. So like I feel like I don't know if I it just sounds harder, that every step I have to think about like now what is next, now how next looks like. And then the ones that I see, the models that I see that are similar to what I'm considering for myself, I feel like they are oversaturated. I'm late to the game. Um, if like other people haven't made it so far, I'm not exactly optimistic that I would be the one that can be
Hmm.
successful. So a little bit of that, already
Yeah.
discouraged.
Okay. No, that's good. I'm glad you mentioned those. We're going to talk about those. Okay, go ahead, Sally.
So yes, definitely like the financial impact and like also like the benefits, like insurance and things like that. And like I think a little bit less of like the external opinions and thoughts about what I'm doing, but more internal. Like I have a lot of pride in what I've achieved and what I've been able to grow into and everything. And I feel like I personally, and it's not great, but have a lot of like self value and I'm lacking another word, but like feel positive about myself for how what I have been able to achieve and how far I've been able to come. And so then like starting over, it's like I lose that thing that I'm now proud of. And I like also like just the thought of like starting at the bottom of the ladder and putting in the
Right.
hard hours again and having to do this all again with the risk that I then get to that senior lead role again. And then I'm like back in that situation, like, oh, I left the big money at the big corporation to take a risk and I put in all of these hard hours and hard years and everything just to feel the same way. And I've been missing out on that compensation and sense of pride and everything else that I've given up in the
Right.
meantime.
Right. And so there's a few things going on here, not just with Sally, but with all of you. So like that internal perception happens when you have your identity merged with your job. So like the thing that I would love for you to someday accept, like you are those things regardless of what job you have. Like that's you. You don't like your self-worth doesn't come from where you work. You know what I mean? So this is like these are longer conversations. These are like coaching conversations, but that's why that happens because your identity is like enmeshed or merged with it's fused with your career as opposed to you feeling your sense of self-worth rooted inside of you. And then in terms of starting over, starting at the bottom, you know, like nobody says you have to go to another corporation. Like I'm going to talk about this more, but our brains, when we start thinking about change, our brains will start firing off reasons why we shouldn't do it. So I'm going to put a pin in that for now. So Yasmin can share because I don't think you shared yet, right? Or did you? You did. Okay. So everybody shared. Okay. So let me move on because this is actually bringing us to our next topic. So the reason that I had you do this reflection is because what usually happens when I start talking about career possibilities with people is the tendency to get hung up on logistics and reasons why things won't work. So you remember a few minutes ago, I said that the first step in creating an aligned career is exploration, right? It's being open to things. That's like an expansive, a growth mindset, an abundance mindset. But usually what ends up happening is before any exploration can begin, someone starts coming up with all the reasons why something won't work. So I'll have to start from the bottom. Other people have tried and they didn't succeed. Like we don't even know what you're talking about yet, right? Like you don't even know what you're talking about yet, but you're already your nervous system is already like, what are you doing? And maybe you started to feel that when you read about this workshop, right? Some people might have gotten scared, like, I don't even want to talk about that because it's too scary. Or when you were doing your exercises today before this one, maybe it started to come up. So it's an automated response that triggers as soon as you start to look at things a little differently or thinking, like, well, maybe is there another path for me? Because with big life changing questions like, should I change my career? The brain reacts really quickly because at a basic level, it's your fear response kicking in. Any major change comes with risk. Risk is an unknown and can create destabilization. And since risky unknowns with the potential to destabilize your life are seen as a threat to your safety, your brain is going to try to shut you down because it's trying to protect you. That's its job. So it immediately starts listing all of the reasons why change is dangerous, all of the reason why it's impossible, all of the reasons why it won't work. I can't risk my financial stability. What if I lose credibility? What if I have to start over? I'm too old. It's too late. All of these things, right? I had this one woman sign up for a call with me recently, and she knew she was like how you guys are, like wasn't happy, knew she probably wanted to pivot, didn't really know what she wanted to pivot to, but she started asking me about social media. Like, what will people think when they see me on social media? Okay, so like, do you see what I'm saying? She's like 20 steps ahead and hasn't and but that 20 steps ahead is like a protection mechanism. It's just fear. It's not real. It's not rooted in reality. So when we slow down and look at these constraints more carefully, they usually fall into two different categories. So there's real constraints and imagined constraints. Real constraints are things like your mortgage. Like, okay, you have to pay your mortgage. That's real. Family responsibilities or visa status, something like that. So those are practical things. They're not blockers. They're just things you have to plan for. But imagined constraints are assumptions, assumptions about what people will think, assumptions about what kind of income is possible, assumptions about what kind of success is possible, assumptions about what changing direction would require. You see the difference there? So, unless we slow down and examine those assumptions carefully, they start to limit what we believe is possible for our lives because they're limiting beliefs. We're being ruled by our fear response. And when we're being ruled by our fear response, we take a very predictable path. We follow the options that feel safest or the most familiar. But as a result, we end up unintentionally limiting what we're actually capable of creating. So it's actually kind of sad if you think about it, because I believe every human being is capable of living up to amazing and great things, but we're so fear driven, and especially if because that's survival, like on a human evolutionary level. We are wired to survive and to stay safe. So all of the systems in our body and are designed to do that. That's why that happens. So the trick is like just understanding when that's happening and recognizing when it's fear and when it's real. And then also any type of pivot, doing it in such a way that still feels safe, right? That's strategic, it's aligned, it's intentional, it's financially viable. That's why I always say you can do it without burning your life down. Like nobody's saying to do that, but the fear response that you're having is in response to that. Do you see what I mean? So the range of possibilities is so much bigger than we realize because we're rooted in this fear. So now just quickly, I'd like for you to go back to that list you wrote at the beginning of this section. And you can write down any additional concerns or obstacles, and then see if you can mark which ones are assumptions versus which ones are legitimate. Okay, how are you guys doing? Good? Okay. Do you want to share quickly?
Sure. So I had two that in the industry I'm thinking is saturated, and a lot of people are like the success rate isn't high. I think that's more real, just statistically speaking. Um, I don't have the exact stats, but I think that's just like a little sounds more real. But the others two were that the transition needs extra time. Now I have like to work 120%. And that it requires creativity to identify every next step. These two, I feel like they're imagined constraints, like it could be more manageable that I'm assuming right now.
Right. And so the key with all of these, so thank you for sharing, is to remain open to possibility. So while it might be true that statistically speaking, the market is saturated, you haven't specced out exactly what your very specific niche will be. And I can tell you, like, there's, millions of coaches out there, but like nobody's doing it exactly the way I do it because I'm an individual human being. And that's true for every coach out there. And it's going to be true for the way that you do your thing. Like you're going to have your special flavor of it that if, we work together on it, it would be a very specific niche. So that's what differentiates you, right? And that's true
Exactly.
with any kind of career pivot. There's always an angle. Who would like to go next?
I can go. Or Emily, either. Um, I think, as you probably expected with this, all of them were imagined, except for I did put under real as like my existing financial responsibilities because those are real. And then this one I put under real, but I think you would argue is imagined, is also just the benefits, like outside of even just like the direct financial benefits, but like the support, the fertility insurance, that all of those things that I get at my current company are unlikely to be matched anywhere else, but that's not necessarily a given.
Right. So again, it's like, thank you for sharing, being open to the possibility. I'm not saying like you could find another company where you could have benefits like that, because we all know like the benefits where you work are really good. But like maybe you make so much money, you pay for insurance yourself. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of openness that when you're thinking about this stuff is important to have because it's just an exploration. It's just being open. If we start making assumptions before we're open, then we're closing everything off before it has the chance to even materialize. And therefore we're limiting ourselves. Right? Okay. So Emily, would you like to go?
Yeah, and I don't really have anything new to add. I think same sentiment. And most of the things that are rooted in fear are imagined and can probably be overcome. I think, the real is money. I just put like what's the first step as a constraint, more like I like knowing what step to take. But if you're open and you just try a path or try a different thing, like I think that could probably go in the imagine category too.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think most things are imagined.
Okay, good. Great. So the exercise accomplished its purpose. Okay, so we talked a lot about nervous system stuff, but I just want to reiterate because I think it's really important. But once someone begins questioning their career path or even asking what are the other options, the brain usually tries to solve the entire problem immediately. So, Emily, I like that you're asking about the first step because actually a lot of people don't do that. They try to come out like with the full plan and that starts to get overwhelming, and it's also impossible. But because your brain craves stability because it's trying to create safety, it wants to control the outcome, which means it's going to try to lock you into a plan or a decision even as quickly as possible because that's stable and stability keeps you safe. It's this attempt to create a plan or make a decision that starts people spiraling, right? What should I do next? Maybe I should do this, or maybe I should do that other thing, or should I just change companies? What about writing a book, or how will I make enough money? And it just starts to spiral out of control, you know, and suddenly it feels like you need to figure out your entire future before you take a little baby step forward. And that's when people start feeling overwhelmed. Then they write the whole thing off and just put the entire exploration on hold because it's just too much. It's too overwhelming. So that's how people get stuck. Because trying to solve a 10-year question in a single afternoon is overwhelming. You can't do it, it's not possible. So instead of trying to solve everything immediately, I like to introduce a much simpler approach. And Emily, this sort of speaks to your like, well, what's first? So when your brain starts spinning and asking that question, well, like, what do I do first? I usually ask myself, like, what is the smallest step I could take in order to explore something? And we're going to talk about explore what in a second, but it's this like idea of taking these incremental baby steps that are really, really helpful when figuring out your pivot, not committing to it, right? So think about this like an exploration. You're not trying to decide your future. You're just exploring things. And that's a really important thing to remind your brain. Like when you start spinning out with fear, nothing's happening, nothing's changing. I'm not making any major decisions. I'm just gathering information right now. This is an exploration. I'm learning. And by the way, that exploration part is really fun because it gives you a low commitment way to bring something new and interesting back into your career. It gives you something new to focus on, something novel, right? Remember how we talked about novelty a few times today already. So these types of explorations spark enough novelty to bring new energy back into your current career because it takes the focus off the part of your life that's not fulfilling you. And by doing an exploration, it feels like movement, which alleviates that stuck feeling because you feel like you're doing something. And like I said, these steps are small. I mean, like baby steps, like talking to someone in another field that you're interested in, attending an event or a conference related to what you're interested in exploring, researching a topic that interests you. Maybe it's experimenting with a small project or learning a new skill. So these small exploratory steps are incredibly powerful because they move you out of speculation and stuckness and into real world experience. You're gathering information, and information helps you make informed decisions. Okay, so once you start that exploration, that's when those next steps start to unfold without you even having to do anything. It really is phenomenal. Most people, like I said, imagine that doing something like this takes one big leap, like a complete reinvention overnight. But in reality, most of these shifts are much more gradual. And it doesn't have to mean, like I said this a few times already, giving up on one thing entirely to do something else. Like it doesn't have to be black and white. It can mean bring something into your current situation that just expands your view of what your career can look like. There's so many possibilities and so many configurations of your career. You just have to be open to seeing them. So this was the case with one of my longtime coaching clients. I wanted to tell you this story really quickly. I've worked with her for about 2 years. Initially, she came to me because she was feeling stuck, but she thought the answer was to get more visibility at work. Then once we started working through some of that, she was like, actually, I don't even like what I'm doing. This career path doesn't even make sense for me. She hit that mid-career ceiling. So we spent the next phase of our coaching time together on this process that I've been sharing with you today. So she started first with being open to the possibility that there were options. Then she started doing these little explorations. So with this woman in particular, she was working in tech, but earlier in her career, she had been in beauty. She was like a media buyer, and she loves the beauty industry and wanted to get back to beauty. So she started reaching out to people in the beauty industry again, reconnecting with old contacts. She joined a professional organization and started going to their events and started basically just like not only rekindling those old connections, but making new ones. And this was over about a 6-month period. But then before we both knew it, her entirely new path unfolded, and she actually just launched a consulting business and landed her first paying client. Okay. And she's still working at her 9 to 5. So this is the same process that I use to figure out my own path. So in both of these examples, neither one of us burned down our jobs and started over. We're both still working at our current jobs, and creating like that aligned transition. And like you can see, these decisions weren't in a reactive way. They were a very aligned, intentional exploration. The transition is happening with intention and a strategy, not an emotional reaction. So when you approach an aligned career in that way, your transition can happen over time in a way that's intentional and strategic and can help mitigate against the financial concerns or the real financial obligations that you have. In the process, though, I will say that it also, even though you're doing both, having your new thing adds so much more fulfillment to your current situation, which actually brings new energy to everything that you're doing. So it including the job that you'd like to move away from. So you can see like gaining alignment doesn't have to mean burning everything down to suddenly start a new career. Real alignment happens through a series of small experiments, exploring ideas, testing interests, developing new skills, having conversations with people you admire. So each of these small steps gives you feedback. And that feedback begins to reveal something important. It tells you what actually feels energizing and interesting and what doesn't. Over time, those explorations create a clearer picture of what the next phase of your career could look like. And then before you know it, the path unfolds right in front of you. So that's why the goal at this stage isn't to have the entire path figured out at once. The goal is to simply to begin moving towards what feels aligned. In other words, what feels interesting, energizing, meaningful. Following that process will take you on the path that aligns most with who you are today. And it's that movement that creates your clarity, not endless analysis, what ifing, or spiraling. So, the key point I wanted you to get from this is that your career doesn't have to be something that simply happens to you. It can be something that you intentionally design. That moment that you begin asking different questions, noticing your own signals, noticing your energy, being open through exploration, that's when you begin shifting from reacting to creating your career more consciously. So we're going to jump ahead because we're almost out of time. Because I want to save time at the end if you guys want to ask anything. So we'll skip this exploration, but I would like for you guys to do this on your own, just to reflect on anything that's been coming up for you recently that you've felt curious about. So that could be an idea you've had in the back of your mind. It could be like a type of work you've wondered about. It's something you've thought about learning or exploring, something maybe that came to mind during this workshop. Because if that actually happened during this workshop, it's probably not random. It's probably like your subconscious giving you signals. So that's something to just hone in on. And instead of asking yourself the question, is this the right career move? Just ask yourself, what's one small step I could take to explore that idea? Okay. So you can hold on to that for the next time. So I want to just take a minute to talk about like basically everything we talked about today, and then sort of like what the next step would look like. So my hope is that the workshop today helped you realize a few things. Maybe that, the feeling you've been having at work actually has a name. Maybe now you realize how many skills you have developed over the years that you hadn't fully recognized before. Or maybe you're just more familiar with the parts of your work that energize you versus drain you. But the goal today wasn't to tell you what your next move should be. It was to help you to see that you have more options than you previously realized. So try not to pressure yourself to have everything figured out after this workshop, because that's not the goal. The goal was just to expand your awareness to see your situation differently, to see that there are so many possibilities, and to help you recognize the version of you who knows what she wants and how she wants to live. And the way that she wants to live is most likely not aligned with how you're working today. So for many women, this is sort of like the minute where something really interesting happens, because once you begin seeing your career through a different lens, you start asking bigger questions like, what do I actually want it to look like? And how do I actually do this? How do I move towards something more aligned without destabilizing my life? Those are incredibly important questions, but they're challenging to answer on your own, because when you're inside your own situation, it's hard to see the full range of possibilities available to you. So one of the ways I support women through this process is through a program called the Career Reinvention Program. And it's designed specifically for women who've built successful careers, but are starting to feel the weight of that mid-career ceiling. So they're like, not sure, Emily characterized this well, like, what is it? Like, okay, I feel this way. Now what? What's the next step? So in this program, we work through a very structured process to help you identify the types of explorations that will give you the right kind of feedback. We spend time identifying skills, interests, qualities that could open up this new career direction. And then I help you put together a strategy for how to begin putting those insights into action. So that could just be like testing new ideas through a side project. It could be like my one client, like kicking off her consulting business. It could be transitioning to something totally new. But the whole philosophy behind this is like not burning down your life. It's a thoughtful, realistic, financially viable strategy. So, everyone's situation is different. Enrolling in the program isn't like the obvious next step for everyone. So the if it sounds interesting, the next step would just to be to do a career alignment strategy session with me. It's just a one-on-one conversation where we take a closer look at your situation, where you want your career to go next. And the purpose of that call is to help me understand you and your situation better. And then from there, we talk about what the path could look like. And if it seems like the program is the right structure and support for you, I can walk you through the whole thing. But that way you get to decide whether it feels like the right next step. Because not everyone who attended today will need that level of support. But if you've been thinking about these questions for a while, that session is a great place to start. So if you want to book one, I've got a link. I'll put it in the chat. You can also just scan that handy QR code there. Yeah. So that's it. I just wanted to ask if you guys have any questions that you want to ask. You know, we kind of have, it's just the two of us now. Everybody had to drop off. So I'm going to come back to you so I can see you. Anything top of mind that's like a burning desire? Question.
Chelsea, I wanted to thank you for this. One question that comes for me is that like often this sounds like an extra work. You know, I'm just like, I'm already working like 40 hours a week. Like, where do I prioritize this? Like how to discipline myself so that I'm like weeks don't pass by and I'm not doing that networking call. That would be my first step.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the trick to that, well, first of all, the first step is to stop telling yourself that you don't have the time, because you do. It's just a matter of prioritization. So when I first started doing it, it was pretty sparse, and it kind of picks up over time. But you have to basically just allocate time for yourself. You decide like how much is reasonable for me to start working on it, and you put it in your calendar just like you would with a meeting. Because you don't miss meetings with other people, right? You don't just not show up. Like if you have a meeting in your calendar, you go. But the thing that's kind of funny is like we let ourselves down all the time. We miss time with ourselves all the time. And like we should be our biggest advocates and our biggest supporters of ourselves. So the way you have to think about it is that your job doesn't care about you as a person. I'm just going to be real here for a minute. You have to look out for you, right? So you're basically saying when you do that, I'm going to prioritize this thing that doesn't care about me, which by the way could like end at any moment without me knowing it. So I look at it like it's not only something that you're doing for yourself, but it's something that you're doing to ensure your future and to give you options and to give you opportunity. And outside of like the sort of like financial stability and potential flexibility and freedom you get, it's just going to make you happier. So that's how you have to think about it. It's so beneficial, and in the long run, the short term long run, it'll benefit your current career because it'll make you happier and you'll be able to show up with more energy. So, you know, an hour a week is not going to make or break your career or your job. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
even like 5 hours a week. That's how you have to think about it, because you spend so much time working. So you'll make up for it. That is just another thing we say as a way to self-sabotage because it's scary. So it's well, I can't. I've got my job. It's too much time. And it's tricky because you feel like you're being responsible when you do that. But like that's one of the ways that your nervous system kind of plays a trick on you in a way, you know, to keep you safe.
Mhm.
Does that make
Thank
sense?
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. It does. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for all of this. I really like the you don't have to burn it all down to start making changes, because like that is what's the scary part, right? Is like burning it all down, starting from scratch. But like to your point, like you and the example you gave of the other person you're working with, like maintaining your job while getting further and further into that other thing. It's not just like you jump right over. It's like you
Yeah.
move your way in.
Yeah, exactly. That's my whole thing. You know, I worked with this coach. I'm going to close this thing. So I worked with this coach recently, and she's a little unhinged, I would say. Super reckless, right? And like basically was like, you have to quit your job right now. You have to go on all in. And I just don't think that you have to do that. I really don't. I haven't been doing it, and I've been successfully navigating both. And as I said, I have some other clients that I've been helping them do the same thing with the same process. Like once I did it, then I started teaching it to other people. It's People do it all the time. Software engineers do it all the time. They build startups while they're working in their tech job. Men do it all of the time. So it's possible. And the thing that you also have to remember is like when you work for a company, you are limited by that company. Your salary is limited. You're limited by what they tell you you're capable of accomplishing. You're playing by their rules. But when you're out on your own, like I know both of you guys really well, like you're unstoppable. There's nothing that can stop you. So just think about that. Like having sort of like the freedom to expand and to be your full self and have your full ambition and everything that you know you're capable of. You're already working so hard in your job. Imagine if you work that hard for yourself with no limitations. Nobody telling you, oh, you can't do this and oh, you're not the right level and, right? So when you start thinking like that, then it's like, whoa, okay. And I will tell you, like, companies are cutting back on cost so much right now that they're hiring more freelancers and consultants than ever because they don't have to pay people benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And also the success of other people around you and how crowded it is. And like you're kind of a commodity when you work at a company. Whereas
Right.
if you put yourself out in the world and position yourself with, like, believe me, like you can write a strong positioning statement. You know what I mean? Like you can spin your story into something amazing. And it's not spin, it's real. But it's like that's why I had you guys do that exercise to write down all of your skills. It's unfathomable like how much you know how to do that you could then that translates into something else.
Yeah. Mhm. Inspired.
Great. All right. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay.
Good.
Good. I thank you both so much for your participation and for sticking around. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's been really great doing this with you.
Thank you, Chelsea. This is
Thank you,
great.
Chelsea. It was amazing. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Have a good
Bye.
weekend.
You too. Bye.